He stepped outside at dusk to help a neighbor with a flat tire. They talked for a minute. He sent one last text that sounded normal. 17 minutes later, his phone went quiet. No calls. No replies. What happens in that gap? He lived on a short residential street where nothing much ever changed. Same cars parked in the same spots. Same porch lights coming on at the same time each night. It was the kind of place where people waved without stopping and borrowed tools without writing their names on them. He'd been there a few years, long enough to know which houses stayed quiet and which ones had kids running in and out. Long enough to recognize footsteps on the sidewalk. Long enough that being a neighbor didn't feel like a risk. Most evenings followed the same pattern. He'd get home before dark, leave his phone on the counter, eat something simple, and eat standing up. Sometimes he'd step outside afterward just to breathe for a minute. Dusk was his favorite. The noise dropped off then. Engines faded. Dogs settled. The street softened. He wasn't looking for trouble or excitement. He liked things steady, predictable. He was the kind of person people trusted without really thinking about why. That day didn't feel different. Work ran a little late, but not enough to matter. He stopped at a convenience store near his place, picked up a drink, and drove home the same route he always took. The sun was already low when he pulled onto his street. The lights stretched thin and orange across the pavement. A car was parked awkwardly a few houses down. Hazard lights blinking. One tire slumped flat against the curb. It caught his attention because it didn't belong there. He noticed things like that. He parked, grabbed his drink, and glanced over again. Someone stood near the trunk, phone pressed to their ear, posture tense in that way people get when they're not sure what to do next. They were a neighbor, not someone he knew well, but familiar enough. He'd seen them before, passing hellos, small nods, the kind of person you recognize without remembering where from. He went inside first, set his keys down, put the drink in the fridge. He told himself he was just going to check the mail, maybe see if they needed anything. It felt automatic, like muscle memory. When he stepped back outside, the air had cooled. The streetlights were just beginning to hum to life. The neighbor had ended their call and was crouched near the wheel now, hands on their knees, staring at the tire like it might fix itself. He asked if they were okay. They said they thought so. Just a flat. Bad timing. They laughed a little, embarrassed. He told them he had a jack in his trunk. Said it wasn't a problem. He'd done this before. Plenty of times. There was no hesitation. No moment of doubt. Just a small, ordinary decision made without weight. They talked while he worked. About nothing important. About how quickly it had gotten dark. About how annoying flats always seemed to happen at the worst times. The kind of conversation that fills space without meaning anything. A porch camera across the street would later show the two of them standing side by side. Their silhouettes calm, unrushed. No signs of tension. Just neighbors sharing a task. He sent a quick text while the car was being lifted. Told someone he might be a few minutes late. Added a short line about helping out. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of message you send because you assume you'll be back soon. The tire came off easily. The spare went on. He tightened the bolts, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped back. The neighbor thanked him more than once. Said they didn't know what they would have done otherwise. He shrugged it off. Told them to drive slow and get the tire replaced as soon as they could. The street was quiet again. The hazard lights clicked off. The car pulled away, turning the corner and disappearing out of view. He stood there a moment longer than necessary. Took another breath of cooling air. Looked down the street the way people do when they're deciding whether to go back inside or linger just a bit. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing stood out. He went back toward his house, unaware that this was the last normal minute of his night. Part 2. He went back inside and picked up where he'd left off. Shoes off by the door. Lights on in the kitchen. The small sounds of evening settling back into place. If there was any shift in the air, he didn't feel it. He checked his phone again. No new messages. That was normal. He wasn't someone who stayed glued to it. He moved through his apartment, opening cabinets, deciding what to eat. The fridge hummed. A neighbor's TV murmured through a shared wall. Outside, the street had returned to its usual rhythm. A few cars passed through. Someone walked a dog. Porch lights cast soft pools across the sidewalk. The flat tire was already becoming forgettable, the way small disruptions usually do. He ate slowly, leaning against the counter. Thought about the next day. About errands he'd been putting off. About nothing that felt urgent. The neighbor crossed his mind once, briefly. He hoped they made it home okay. He assumed they had. After dinner, he rinsed his plate and set it in the sink. He wiped his hands on a towel and picked up his phone again, this time to answer a message that had come in while he was outside earlier. He typed back a short reply. Casual. Normal. He sent it without thinking. That text would later be marked as the last confirmed message sent from his phone. At the time, it didn't feel like a final anything. It was just a response. The kind you send while standing in your kitchen, already half focused on something else. He moved to the living room and sat down for a moment. The couch dipped where it always did. He scrolled aimlessly, not really reading. Outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps faded. The neighborhood exhaled. A few minutes passed. Then a few more. He stood up again, walked toward the front of the apartment, looked out through the window, not for any reason he could later explain. The street looked the same. Empty. Still. Trust doesn't announce itself. It's quiet. It builds in small ways. In familiar faces. In shared space. In the belief that what happened 5 minutes ago will still make sense 5 minutes from now. He'd lived by that without question. He grabbed his keys again. Not because he needed to go anywhere far. Just to step outside. Maybe take the trash out. Maybe get some air. He didn't leave a note. Didn't tell anyone. There was no reason to. On the sidewalk, a security camera across the street would later show him exiting his front door. Alone. Hands at his sides. No hurry. He paused, looking down the block. Nothing forced his attention. Nothing obvious pulled him away. He walked a short distance. Stopped. Looked back toward his place. The light inside still on. The door closed behind him. People who knew him later said this wasn't unusual. He did things like that. Stepped out. Checked something. Took brief walks. He liked quiet moments. He liked space. Another camera further down the street caught a shape moving at the edge of the frame. Someone approaching. Someone familiar enough that he didn't react. There was no sign of alarm. No sudden change in posture. No instinct telling him to turn around. From inside nearby houses, life continued uninterrupted. Dishes clinked. Televisions played. Phones buzzed and were answered. Time passed in thin slices. At some point, his phone stopped moving. No more messages went out. No calls were answered. No location updates changed. It didn't power off. It just stayed still. At home, the light in his living room remained on. The plate still sat in the sink. His shoes were by the door where he'd kicked them off earlier. The trash wasn't taken out. Minutes stretched quietly. Then longer. Someone sent another message. It wasn't urgent. Just a check-in. It showed as delivered. No response followed. Later, another message. Then a call. It rang until it didn't. 17 minutes had already passed since his last text. No one knew it yet. No one felt it. But the ordinary trust of the evening had already slipped out of reach, leaving only a quiet gap where his routine should have continued. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was absence. The phone stayed silent longer than it ever had. The kind of silence that doesn't register right away, because everyone misses messages sometimes. Because batteries die. Because people get distracted. Another text came in. Then another. Both sat unanswered. Inside his place, nothing changed. The light stayed on. The room stayed still. Time moved forward without him. Across the street, a camera continued to do what it always did. Record empty sidewalk. Occasional headlights. A cat slipping through frame. No rush. No struggle. Just normal motion passing through a fixed square of space. Someone who knew him tried calling again. It went to voicemail. That was unusual. He usually picked up, or called back quickly, or at least sent a short reply explaining why he couldn't talk. This time, there was nothing. The person on the other end waited a few minutes before trying again. Then longer. They told themselves the same things people always do. He's busy. He stepped away. He'll call back. Trust fills in gaps. Until it doesn't. By the time anyone thought to worry, the evening had already shifted into night. Porch lights that had been warm now looked harsh. The street felt emptier, even though it wasn't. A neighbor later said they remembered seeing him earlier, helping out, doing a good thing. That detail stuck because it made what followed harder to accept. Good things are supposed to end cleanly. The camera down the block caught movement again. 2 figures this time. One taller, one shorter. They didn't stop. They didn't linger. They passed through frame and disappeared the way people do when they are just going somewhere else. There was no timestamp that screamed for attention. No single moment that announced itself as important. Just footage that only mattered once you knew what didn't come after. Inside, his phone lay where it had last been handled. Screen dark. Battery fine. Messages waiting. A call log would later show missed attempts stacking quietly. No outgoing activity. No replies. No explanation. Someone drove by his place and noticed the light was still on. It struck them as odd. He usually turned it off. He liked the place dark at night. It was a small detail, but it stuck. They didn't stop. Not yet. Another hour passed. When someone finally knocked, it wasn't forceful. Just a quick check. A pause. Another knock, louder this time. No answer. They tried calling again while standing outside. The sound of ringing came faintly through the door. Muffled. Distant. Like it was coming from a room that didn't want to give anything back. Inside, nothing moved. The person at the door felt that shift then. The one where normal explanations stop fitting. Where you start replaying the day in reverse, looking for the moment you missed. They stepped back onto the sidewalk and looked down the street. It looked the same as it always did. Calm. Empty. Too calm. A camera across the way captured them standing there, phone in hand, turning slowly as if the answer might be waiting somewhere just out of frame. They left to get help. Later, more people would watch the footage, frame by frame, slowing down ordinary seconds until they felt heavy, searching for a glance, a gesture, anything that suggested what went wrong. But the footage offered no clarity, only movement without meaning. The flat tire came up again. The neighbor, the help, the timing. 17 minutes. That number settled in. Not long enough to travel far. Not short enough to explain away. Inside his place, the evening remained frozen. Food half-eaten. Messages unanswered. Plans unfinished. His life hadn't exploded or collapsed. It had simply stopped participating. By the time anyone said the word missing out loud, the night was already deep. The streetlights buzzed. The cameras kept watching. And whatever happened in that narrow window of time stayed just beyond reach, tucked into the quiet space where trust had once felt safest. The point of no return didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, wrapped in a choice that felt small at the time. At some moment after he stepped back outside, he changed direction. Not dramatically, just enough to matter. A few extra steps. A pause. A turn towards something familiar. Cameras showed him moving again. Not fast, not forced. His posture stayed relaxed. His hands stayed visible. Nothing in his body suggested fear or resistance. That detail would trouble people later. It meant he trusted what was happening. Further down the street, another camera caught him approaching a vehicle. The same one from earlier. Parked again, this time farther away. No hazard lights now. Just a dark shape along the curb. The neighbor stood near it, waiting. It made sense in the moment. Maybe something wasn't right. Maybe they needed help again. Maybe the spare felt loose. Maybe they just wanted to say thank you properly. He stopped beside them. There was a brief exchange. A few words no one could hear. A gesture toward the car. Nothing rushed. Nothing aggressive. This was the moment that sealed everything. If he'd stayed where he was. If he'd gone back inside. If he'd ignored it. But he didn't. He leaned closer to look. The camera angle lost part of them then, blocked by the car's frame. Their shapes still visible, but details gone. Another camera further down the block picked up the next movement. A door opening. A step forward. The subtle shift of someone crossing a boundary without realizing it. He entered the vehicle. There was no struggle. No sudden motion. No reason for a passerby to stop and look twice. To anyone watching live, it would have looked like two neighbors finishing a conversation. The car door closed. That sound didn't register to anyone nearby. Cars' doors close all the time. On that street, it blended in. The vehicle sat there for a short moment. Engine off. No urgency, just stillness. Then the engine started. Headlights came on. The car pulled away smoothly, turning at the corner and disappearing from every camera's view. That was it. No footage after that showed him again. Inside his place, the light still burned. The phone still waited. The routine he'd built over years was now irrelevant. People later fixated on that choice. Getting into the car, trusting the same person twice, trusting the familiar shape of a neighbor over the faint discomfort that might have whispered otherwise. But trust doesn't feel reckless when it's built slowly. It feels reasonable. Cameras captured the empty street again. The same sidewalks, the same houses, the same sense of nothing happening. Except something had. The neighbor didn't return. Hours passed before anyone fully understood that whatever had begun as help had turned into something else entirely. By then, the night had erased most traces of movement. The quiet had settled in deep. The last image of him was unremarkable. Just a man stepping forward when asked. Doing what he'd already done once that evening without consequence. That was the moment that couldn't be undone. Whatever came after existed beyond the reach of the street, beyond the cameras, beyond the safety of being seen. The trust that had held the evening together broke, without sound, and the street returned to normal, unaware that one ordinary decision had carried someone completely out of view. By morning, the light in his place was still on. Sunlight crept through the window and mixed with it, making the room look wrong in a way that's hard to explain. Too bright, too unchanged. Like time had moved on without permission. His phone finally stopped ringing because no one was calling anymore. Messages sat unopened. The battery dipped slowly, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. People retraced his last evening in pieces. Not formally, not yet. Just the way worried people do when they are trying to convince themselves there's an easy answer hiding somewhere. He helped a neighbor. He came back inside. He stepped out again. That was the shape of it. The street looked the same in daylight. Lawns trimmed. Cars parked neatly. Nothing about it suggested danger. Nothing about it explained why one person hadn't come home. Someone unlocked his door later that day, called his name into the quiet. The echo came back empty. The place smelled like dinner from the night before. The plate was still in the sink. The couch cushion still dipped where he'd sat today. It felt like he might walk back in at any moment and apologize for the worry. Say his phone died. Say he lost track of time. But hours passed. Then another night. The cameras became important in a way they'd never been before. People watched the footage slowly, over and over, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. There he was, helping. There he was, stepping outside. There he was, trusting someone he recognized. And then he wasn't there anymore. The 17-minute gap pressed itself into everything. Long enough to matter, short enough to haunt. It was measured, timed, replayed. No footage filled it in. The neighbor didn't answer calls. Their place went dark. The car didn't come back. That silence was heavier than anything caught on camera. Days passed. Then weeks. His phone was charged and checked. Nothing new appeared. No delayed message. No missed call that suddenly made sense. The neighborhood adjusted without meaning to. People stopped lingering outside. Porch lights stayed on longer. Doors closed faster. Trust didn't disappear, but it changed shape. People thought about the last normal thing they'd done for someone. A favor, a quick stop, a choice that felt harmless. They wondered how many times they'd made the same one. There was no clean ending. No moment where everything snapped into place. Just a life that stopped intersecting with the rest of the world. His place was eventually darkened. Lights turned off. Mail collected. The small signs of presence carefully erased, one by one. But the footage stayed. A man stepping out at dusk. A neighbor asking for help. A car pulling away calmly. Nothing about it looked violent. Nothing about it warned you. That's what stayed with people the most. Not fear, not shock. Just the quiet understanding that the most dangerous moments don't always feel dangerous when you're inside them. Sometimes they feel like being helpful, like being polite, like being a good neighbor. And sometimes, 17 minutes is all it takes for a normal night to stop continuing.